Good afternoon, everyone. I think ma'am have already joined us. Yes, so ma'am is here. So, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome all of you for today's session. I would like to welcome the speaker of today's session, first of all, Dr. Anindita Roy Saha. She is the coordinator for the Center for Earth Studies at IP College, and she is also the coordinator of this course. So, I would also welcome all the faculty members and all the participants who have joined us here today in this session under the theme Global Climate Change. Thank you, ma'am, for agreeing to deliver a talk in this session. It is my privilege to introduce her to all the participants. Dr. Saha is an associate professor at the Department of Economics and the head of the Department of Environmental Studies in the Indraprastha College for Women, University of Delhi. She is the coordinator of the Center for Earth Studies at the Indraprastha College, a research and learning center aimed towards interdisciplinary initiatives for environmental protection and sustainable development. She is a visiting faculty at the Department of Environmental Studies, University of Delhi, where she teaches environmental economics and resource economics. Dr. Saha has studied at Jadavpur University, Kolkata, and Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She obtained her PhD degree from JNU in the area of energy economics. Her area of specialization is developmental economics with special focus on the economics of energy, environment, and resources. She has been associated with University of Delhi, Nalanda University, JNU, University of Delhi South Campus, Ambedkar University, and MIT University in various academic and professional capacities. She has many scholarly articles in national and international journals to her credit. She has supervised several research projects and participated in international and national level conferences, seminars, and workshops in areas covering environmental education, climate change, disaster management, and environmental sustainability. Ma'am, I'm sure that we are going to benefit immensely from your decades of teaching and research experience. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Naveen. Thank you very much for your kind words, your kind introduction. Let me just start on a lighter note by trying to say why I am here. As you have heard, that my area of work is actually economics. And whatever we talk about today, whatever environmental problems, ecological imbalances that we talk about, economics is the bad guy. So everything is because of economic development. I would like to talk about that later, what we mean by economic development. But economics is so central to all these activities and to our existence that perhaps we cannot have a fruitful discussion without talking about economics. So I'm just trying to justify why I am here and why economics is important. Thank you very much, Naveen and Neha, for inviting me to deliver the last lecture in the session, where I would like to, I'll try to wind up the discussions that you have been following for almost a month, 4 weeks. I'm very happy to be part of this course, and I'm very happy to be presenting today. So thank you very much for being here, and I hope I'll be able to share some thoughts, some pointers which bother me and which I think should bother all of us in the civil society. I'll just take 2 minutes to set my presentation. And this is kind of a technological handicap for our generation. So just bear with me. Please bear with me. Naveen, please tell me if my screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am. Your screen is visible. You can put your slides on a slideshow. Full screen, yes, and set to.
Is it fine now?
Yes, ma'am. It is fine. Your first slide is visible to us.
Yeah, this is the title slide, right? Yes. Okay, so let me just start with, I'm just giving you a minute to see the topic that I am going to talk about, the circular economic concept, and some possible, solutions that we can think of in a situation where we all are going through the pandemic. So there is no need to explain why my first slide talks about COVID. We all are going through this as we speak. what is it that the COVID-19 crisis has told us or is telling us? The first thing that I would like to point out is that COVID crisis has underlined a false binary between the rural and the urban developmental patterns. The idea that cities are always the centers of all economic activities and therefore all economic prosperity and well-being, that has been put under a question. That cities are perhaps not really all so bright and nice. The city lights are not always so bright. Cities and urban centers are also hubs of disease and distress. We have seen this over the last 6 months. This is what we are going through. And we have seen an overall failure in the entire system in handling the pandemic, both in terms of lives and livelihood. So from an urban point of view, from where we are speaking, I'll just try to raise a few issues here related to our urban lives and our perceptions about economic prosperity centering around urban lives and how they contribute to the global problems. And therefore, this is perhaps a time where we need to rethink about the way we have thought about the urbanization process, the way we have thought about industrialization process, the way we thought about economic growth process. And therefore, is it that COVID is also opening some gateways for a green future for us, for a future which may be more sustainable? I mean, there's no doubt that what we have been doing so far has not been sustainable. And COVID is one of the many things which are lined up to come. I mean, scientists, economists, everybody, all of them are warning us. So let us see if COVID is giving us any lessons and opening some gateways in front of us through which we may try to go towards a sustainable future. These are all known to us. What are the impacts and how we have, faced the pandemic. We had a lockdown and we are staying at home. Even now, as we speak, we are staying at home, trying to be safe. And we have also seen that the environmental quality has rejuvenated. I mean, as we say, the environment is now in a recharging mode. So environment is becoming clear, and there have been many such reports of the improvement in the environmental quality. We have seen animals crossing the roads in the broad daylight. We have seen animals getting back to the canals in Venice. We have seen the Himalayas being visible from a distance. All these things are happening and we all felt very happy. All these environmental benefits came when the economy actually came to a halt. Now, economy coming to a halt meant environmental benefit, but it meant distress for the teeming millions. Millions of people have been suffering and they are still suffering. And that is what takes us to the question of the trade-off which exists between environment and economy. Is it that we can have economic prosperity and environmental sustainability together, or is it that one is a price for the other? And I would also like to pose the question that the benefits which we are seeing now when everything is in a halt, everything was entirely in a halt and now things are opening, but still not to the fullest normal. Are these benefits temporary, or are there going to be some effects which will take us to the future, which promises to be a better future, or is it all a doomsday? As I said, the pandemic had an urban phase. It does have an urban phase. It started from urban centers. Now that it has moved to the rural areas, that's a different story altogether. But pandemic definitely had an urban phase, which came through various reasons known to all of us. Therefore, our urban existence is something that we must examine. Predictions say that by 2050, 70% of the world population will be living in cities. And as basic economic theory tells us, as you grow, quote unquote, as you grow, you move more and more towards industrialization and urbanization. And in that process, therefore, 70% of the world population will be living in urban centers by 2050. And we have seen the urban problems. So where do we stand and what do we read and what do we think about our future? This very large scale and fast migration leading towards towards the development of the urban centers through involvement in industrial activities, through involvement in construction activities. All these things have led to several problems which we all are aware of. These people who migrate in such large numbers, all of them definitely do not get absorbed in the formal sector, and all of them do not really have what we can call a decent quality of life. And therefore, poverty, inequality, ill health, poor quality of life, these things are part and parcel of the urban informal sector. So there's a huge urban informal sector where people have miserable conditions of life. They already had it, and the pandemic has made it worse. Along with this continuing problems, there are also environmental hazards. We all are familiar with the problems of pollution, both ambient pollution and indoor pollution. And pollution not only for air, but pollution of everything that we talk about: soil, water, air, everything. I will not be talking about pollution here. We already had one whole week dedicated for the discussion of pollution. So I would like to move to the other major environmental hazard, that is regarding the waste, the solid waste management and the solid waste problem. Let us call it a solid waste problem because it involves generation and management both. Solid waste is a challenge. It's already a challenge, and it is increasing continuously with our urban lifestyle, with our growing lifestyle. Now, during the pandemic, what happened to waste generation? There was definitely an improvement in the regular waste generation because industries were on a halt. The transport sector was also minimized to a very low. So the major polluters, the major emitters, industry and transport, they were more or less standstill. So obviously that was the main reason for the cleansing that environment had. The third sector, which is very, very significant here, is the hospitality sector, travel and tourism. So all these came to major halt during the lockdown period. And therefore the waste generated in these sectors reduced significantly. In the hospitality sector, there are huge wastes generated, not only in the food plates, but also even in preparing, even in the hotels, everywhere. So these are sectors of large-scale consumption of various resources, and they are also large-scale producers of waste, which were under control during the pandemic, during the lockdown. What will happen to these sectors in future from an economic point of view is a different story. But when we're talking about waste generation, definitely there was a benefit. However, at the same time, there was a new entrant in the market, in the solid waste market, which has been called the COVID waste, a new term of, a new class of waste which have emerged during COVID-19. And what are these COVID wastes all about? We can broadly classify them under three types. One is, as we all know, the medical gears, the PPEs, the personal protective gears, and all medical instruments and apparatus that have been used. Secondly, the fast-moving consumer goods, the FMCGs, the consumer items. They have also contributed to the COVID waste. And also the third category, I would like to put plastic, aluminum, cellophane, these kind of items, which have also increased phenomenally during COVID. And maybe all three categories can be put under COVID waste, keeping in mind that the large part of this is actually from the medical sector. Medical waste in our country is about 550 tons per day. This is a 2018 figure. So the average waste generation in the medical sector is about 550 tons per day. And it is estimated to be 775 tons per day by 2020. And this estimation was made before COVID-19. During COVID, this waste generation has increased sixfold. In 6 months, it has increased sixfold. There's a huge amount of medical waste which has been generated during the last few months of COVID. And what are these, starting from your masks and gloves to shoe covers, everything. Then you have, and most of these are plastic-based and liquid-resistant items. So in the COVID medical sector, we are using a huge amount of non-woven fabric based on polypropylene, which is a dense fabric. I mean, its density is about 20-25 grams per square meter. So it's a very dense non-woven fabric, which is used for these masks, these PPEs. And there is also a huge amount of use of polystyrene, polycarbonate, and polyethylene. All these things, all of you can understand, have major environmental impact. So the medical sector during COVID has caused a huge amount of waste being generated called the COVID waste. There is a resurgence of the items, the bad guys whom we had identified already. They have come back. They have come back with a bang. Plastic is something that we had just started to address, although not successfully, but the process was initiated. There were systemic problems also. However, we identified plastic as a problem and we started working towards that. And around that time, now we are going back to plastic. Plastic waste generation, as you can see, is huge in our country. It's 25,940 tons per day. This is the average plastic waste generation, of which 30% comes from bags of all kinds, starting from your garbage disposal bags to your shopping bags. 30% of the total plastic waste is only in the form of bags. What has happened to these plastic bags now? Why are we talking about these in the context of COVID waste? As we have seen that the state has failed, I'm sorry to say, the state has failed in handling the migrant laborer problem. And therefore, the responsibility was taken partly by the state, but largely by other organizations. And they have provided dry ration and cooked food. So a very natural question which would bother all of us is that when you are distributing food, either in the dry form or in the cooked form, haven't we used a huge amount of plastic bags? We have, but we did not really think about the scientific disposal of this. There has been a lot of discussion and debate regarding the migrant laborer problem. There have been issues for and against, and a lot of discussion. And it has also been highlighted how different organizations have come up to supply the basic subsistence to these moving migrant laborers by providing dry ration and food. But nobody perhaps talked about how these things were distributed. I'm not saying that it's an easy problem. It's definitely a very difficult problem. But when we are addressing a problem, we need to be a little careful about whether we are generating another problem or not. So this is one pointer that I would like to raise here. Another thing which has affected you and me, almost everyone here, is that our behavior as consumers has gone through a drastic change. This change had started, but COVID actually hastened the process, and COVID is also pointing towards that process, where our consumer behavior is moving more towards online shopping. Online shopping and delivery at doorstep, which was part of the COVID management strategy of stay home, stay safe, has actually brought in a huge amount of packaging. If you're shopping online, I'm not talking about the carbon footprint there. That's also something that we need to keep in mind. But there were trade-offs. If there are major areas where, say, for example, transport, where you are saving your carbon emissions, then perhaps you can think of some other alternative footprints. But the moment you move towards online shopping and you need to get, I mean, it's not something that we did very happily. This was also something which we were bound to do, to get our delivery at doorstep. That means we are actually taking recourse to a huge amount of packaging. And as we know, packaging takes us back to that same old problem of plastic. It's interesting that COVID had several impacts, and one of those impacts is about livelihood, as we have already talked about. Many people have lost jobs, we know that. And a lot of urban families have come up with a new business called home delivery of cooked food. You must have noticed. There are two reasons behind this. One is that many people have lost their jobs. And the second reason is that people are homebound. Because people are homebound, they are also in a mood to order food from outside. And because people are jobless, many people are jobless, they are also looking for alternative opportunities. And therefore, a new opportunity, a new occupation has come up, that is home delivery of cooked food. And the moment you talk about home delivery of cooked food, there is nothing other than aluminum, plastic, and cellophane. This is how cooked food come. Okay. Along with that come disposable cutlery. Then what is the challenge? Now, the waste management is a huge challenge that we are facing. COVID waste is not coming only from the hospitals. Waste is not generated only in the burial grounds. We know all the stories of the activities of burial that is taking place. But COVID waste is also contributed largely by the residential areas. People are also there in isolation and quarantine at home. So medical related waste is also being generated not only in the hospitals and burial grounds, but also at home. And with that, we already have our daily domestic waste. And as we already said, that there are disposable items. So daily domestic waste, COVID related domestic waste, and use of disposable items. All these are substantially large in the residential sector. When we are talking about disposable items, there's another interesting social side of the story, which all of us have faced, that during the lockdown period, there was a serious problem. It's a recorded, talked about problem of not having domestic help. This is a social side of a zoonotic disease which has affected our natural processes. So in our social, in our economic life, there was a major issue around the availability of domestic help. If you remember, this was the first set of ideas, first set of items which were discussed when we had lockdown one, unlock one. When we started reopening, this was one major sector, the informal urban laborer sector who work in houses in the residential sector. And non-availability of this group of people led to the use of disposable items, led to online delivery of cooked food. All these things are actually interrelated. So the pandemic, the disease remained not only a physical or a medical issue, but it became a major social issue. And as we know, and as we are, waste disposal is not really something which has sunk in our habits yet. On top of that, recycling activities also were interrupted during the lockdown. When everything came to a near halt, recycling activities also came to a near halt. So all these things led to a huge problem in metropolitan cities like Delhi and Mumbai. Delhi already has waste generated to such an extent that you have these hills in the middle of the city. Mumbai has the sea next to the city. So these are already existing problems, huge challenges. And the current situation has led largely to these situations. And there's a huge threat about our waste management today and tomorrow. And therefore, there is no other way but to rethink about our own action, our anthropogenic action. We live in the age of Anthropocene, which is defined as an age of human intervention into nature, and our continuously increasing and large number of anthropogenic activities have to be rethought. So COVID-19, therefore, is an occasion for us to introspect. We need to stop, introspect, and design our own future. We know what ecological imbalance and environmental degradation means, how they affect our own existence, not only human existence, but existence of all living beings on the planet, the planet's health. And here particularly, I am focusing on the waste generation and waste management problem, which is directly related to our sustainable living. If we cannot handle our waste, our solid liquid, particularly solid waste problems in this context, then we cannot really think of a sustainable future the declared goal in all our documents and all our discussions and all forums where we talk about sustainable development as our common future. So we have to design a sustainable economy, because economy, as we said, is the center of all our activities and all our existence. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals which are listed. SDG 12, if you remember, mentions sustainable economy. It says it has to ensure sustainable production and sustainable consumption. So SDG 7 is particularly talking about a sustainable economy where production and consumption both take place in a sustainable manner. Sustainable production is trying to address the supply side, that if you're producing something, then you supply. And sustainable consumption is trying to address the demand side. You have a demand, that is why you're going for consumption. So the two basic activities, the two basic economic activities of production and consumption, they define the Sustainable Development Goal and its meaning of sustainable production and sustainable consumption, thereby bringing in a sustainable economy where resource use is also sustainable. So that means if we have to have sustainable development, we need to have a sustainable economy where production is sustainable, consumption is sustainable, and resource use is also sustainable. Sustainability, as we know, has to be ecological, it has to be economic, and it also has to be social. So whatever we design for us has to be socially sustainable, ecologically sustainable, and economically sustainable. And therefore, sustainability is not one term. Sustainability is not one issue in hand. Sustainability is a concept. Sustainability is an idea, and sustainability is therefore also a problem of the system. It's a systems problem. In that system, we have different players, different stakeholders. We have a large amount of economics in it. We have a large role being played by technological progress in causing sustainability problems and also for solving sustainability problems. And definitely there is a very important role of public policy. All these taken together defines the system where sustainability has to be addressed. In that sustainable economy where production and consumption have to be sustainable, we have to remember that all these are based mainly on our extraction of natural resources. As we know, nature acts both as a source and also as a sink. Nature acting as a source provides us all the natural resources, and nature acting as a sink is where we give it back in the form of waste. Let us remember that this process cannot be an indefinitely long process. If we keep on functioning this way, then nature has a limited absorptive capacity as a sink, and nature has also a limited stock of resources as a source. So on both source function and sink function, nature has a limit. And these limits, therefore, can cause a limit in the growth process also. This is a well-known theory called the limits to growth theory, first initiated by the Club of Rome in the 1960s, way back in 1960s. The Club of Rome initiated this theory called the limits to growth theory, before which economists, or anybody for that matter, did not realize that this economic growth process cannot be a process which can go on indefinitely. It was identified that if there is a shortage of land or if there is a limited quantity of land, there may be a problem. Labor was never considered to be a major problem because we always have a large population. So in that sense, we always have an excess supply of labor. So production activities will keep on going. And if you're producing something, people are also there to consume. And this sustainable production, sustainable consumption, these concepts were not there. So these were just free concepts of producing and consuming without realizing that the growth process may come to a halt someday. Here we are definitely not saying that you bring every economic activity down and therefore problems are solved. That is not the question. The question is that we have to have whatever we require, but we cannot have it in an unlimited fashion. And that is where the sustainability question actually enters. If you just have a quick look at these figures, then we'll get a clear idea of our extraction of primary materials from the earth. Around the turn of the last century, the total amount of primary materials extracted from nature stood somewhere around 7 billion tons, which became 90 billion tons by 2017, and it is estimated to be 186 billion tons by 2050. 2050, as we know, is kind of a target that we are using for various things, positive and negative. So by 2050, if we are going to extract 186 billion tons of primary materials from the earth, then we can very well imagine what we are heading to. The interaction between the human economy and the natural environment, therefore, needs to be rethought. We have always thought that there are interlinkages which are linear. That means there are natural resources in the natural environment, and human economy keeps on improving in its activities, and this goes on increasing in a linear fashion. However, that is what is not happening anymore, and all the environmental threats, ecological threats that have occurred and we have realized, more so in the recent period, it cannot be a linear process where it keeps on increasing at some given rate. And that is where the latest concept of the circular economy comes. Economy is now considered not to be an open-ended linear concept. The economy is now considered to be a closed system. It's a circular system. And this circular system, this closed system, is subject to the ecological limits. There are natural boundaries within which we have to design, or if we may say redesign, our economic activities. Nature and economy, therefore, is not perceived to be a linear relationship anymore. It is considered to be a circular, interactive relationship which feeds back on each other. The depletable stock of resources, the limited absorptive capacity of nature, the economic systems which are subject to the entropy laws, all these things have to be kept in mind if we have to think of designing a sustainable economy. And if we have to have a sustainable human system based on our anthropogenic activities, based mainly in terms of production, consumption, then we have to think of doing something with our waste, recycling or whatever, any kind of, we'll go into the details of those. The generation and management of waste have to be thought along different lines. And we also need to follow the natural systems. We cannot think that we are the rulers of the planet and therefore we'll do or we'll design all these things the way we wish. We have to follow the natural systems. We have to keep in mind that industries, which is the central activity or the central sector, if we may say, the industrial sector, for the traditional way of thinking of economic growth, then what does industrial ecology tell us? Industrial metabolism, it's called the industrial metabolism. This talks about an integrated collection of physical processes. Yes, there are several physical processes which are collected together, where we use raw materials, energy, and labor, the basic factors of production, and these are converted during the production process, and the finished output goes. This is how the industry actually has its metabolic system, that we draw resources from nature, we convert those inputs into outputs, and those finished outputs go for consumption. This is the simple story of the circular flow of economic activities. The problem comes when we have waste generated both from the production sector as well as the consumption sector, and those things are going back to nature. Finished output does not finish entirely. It leaves waste, and consumption also leaves waste. And therefore, we need to think of both the optimal extraction of natural resources, that is the source, and we also have to think of the optimal way of managing our waste, which is aimed towards the sink. And for that, the best teacher, nature is always the best teacher. So the best lessons can be found from the natural systems. the various cycles which we have, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the hydrological cycle, all these cycles actually give us lessons in designing our closed systems, the closed natural systems, giving us insights and directions to make our economic systems closed and circular, where we have a constant stock and it's more or less unchanging on the average. It cannot be that we extract all our natural capital. I hope everybody is familiar with the ideas of capital. The capital stock may be man-made, that is machine. Capital stock may be human, as we call it, human resource. And capital stock can be natural. So there has been a lot of discussion on these, which capital or which stock should we focus at. And finally, we have come to a situation where we are all sort of agreed upon that we need to maintain our natural capital stock also. It's not that the total capital stock, which we call a weak sustainability rule, it's weak in the sense that we say that, okay, sustainability means my capital stock is maintained. And strong sustainability says that it's not only the total capital stock, but we have to focus particularly on our natural capital stock. So that natural capital stock should be constant. We should not have a dwindling natural capital stock, and that should be unchanging while we are changing our economic activities. And that lesson comes very well from the natural systems, which perhaps humankind has not really paid much attention to in designing the economic systems so far. If we want to highlight mainly on the solid waste issue, the waste management issue, then we have to think of a sustainable industrial economy where resource availability, which we just talked about, the stock concept of that, has to be put together with a flow concept. A stock concept is, in economics, stock concept is something which is measured at a point of time. And this is just like the balance sheet that you have on the 31st of March. So what is the stock as on this date? So we are talking about the natural capital stock, which we just mentioned. But a sustainable industrial economy cannot rely only on the stock. It also has to talk about the flow. A flow is over a period of time. And that is where the waste management instruments of recovery, recycling, reusing, these things come. And without these things, you cannot really have a sustainable economy. Unless you have these flows, you will be stuck in a steady path. You will be in a static path. And there the relationship between environment and economy will get back to that linear relationship that we talked about. Now that we are saying the relationship should be circular, there has to be a flow. I mean, this is basic geometry. Everybody knows that if you have to have a circle, there has to be a flow which brings you back to where you started from. So along with the stock, now we have a flow concept, and the flow concept is pivotal in all our waste management strategies. So from a source to sink, now we are looking at a flow in a circular economy. So the industrial ecology has to be integrated with nature. And in doing that, we have some basic mantras, as they are called, the 3 R's. We all are familiar with the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. We don't need to elaborate on those. We know what these things mean, that we reduce our waste generation, we reuse as far as possible, and if it is still there, then you recycle. With those 3 R's, now we talk about 2 more, 5 R's. Instead of the 3 R's, now we talk about 5 R's, where we have introduced 2 more R's, recovery and residual. So in the industrial ecology, as well as in the household sector, now we have to think of the 5 R's. We reduce as far as possible, we reuse, we recycle, and we also try to recover the residue which is left there. Only then we can think of a sustainable consumption sector and a sustainable production sector. In the 5R waste minimization principle, we have these 5: reduce, reuse, recycle, recover, residual, in kind of a desirability order. Or we may say the activities associated with these 5 R's are prevention, try to prevent as much as possible; minimization, minimize the generation; and then we reuse, recycle, we recover, and we also dispose properly, so that we do not leave anything beyond whatever we took. And that is what the essence of the circular system is. So, I mean, like when we say life is a circle, everything comes in a circular way, what goes around comes around. It's actually the literal meaning of what goes around comes around can actually be used here in this environmental concept. In this particular, we can say that a circular economy is based on this principle of goes. Production happens only if there is a consumption demand. And therefore, it is not only production taking place in industries, but it's equally important to look at the civil society, which influences and which designs consumption. So we all, as part of the civil society, we all as part of the economy, we all as part of the activities that we design, have a responsibility in bringing a sustainability in our nature. If we have to talk about a sustainable life, if we say that we have to have nature in our life, green. Since we are focusing more on the urban issues, I'm not really going into the details of all green color code in all sectors. I'm trying to focus more on the urban sector, where we need to have a green infrastructure. We have to have a green existence, because lack of green is a more urban problem. I mean, as we understand. And if I may repeat, the industrialization, urbanization, and economic growth process is urban, and that comes as a trade-off between nature and growth. So therefore, bringing green infrastructure back in the urban sector is of utmost importance. What is green infrastructure, or GI, as it is popularly called, GI? GI is an interconnected network of green space where we can conserve the natural ecosystems and we can also get our benefits. So we have to design a net which is green. That means the natural ecosystem is preserved in the urban landscape, but that does not mean that we do not reap our benefits from that. We have to do these two things together. As we already said, that zero growth is not a solution. That's not a feasible solution. That's not a consideration. Because if you put everything to halt, everything will stop. So that is not the solution. So we are not saying that we have to sacrifice the natural benefits, but a green infrastructure should optimally mix the benefits that we get from nature while not affecting the natural ecosystem. There are several ways of bringing in the green infrastructure and various ways of using green. I mean, these are some of the techniques which are very well known. I'm sure all of you are familiar with these techniques, how we can bring in a little bit of green in our lives, in starting from garbage to composting to waste management by using green chemistry, using green products. All these things are possible in our very limited scope. So the urban centers can actually do a lot of green activities, which perhaps is the only way for sustainability. And therefore, the solutions are called nature-based solutions, or the NBS. These solutions are called the no-regret solution. That means if you take this kind of solutions, you will not regret in future. This is very much in contrast with the solutions which humankind has taken over so many years of human civilization and human existence. We are regretting today. But nature-based solutions are supposed to be no-regret solutions. The IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, the famous body IUCN, has defined nature-based solution as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. This is the statement officially published by the IUCN, when they launched the idea of nature-based solutions, or NBS. So it is talking about natural ecosystems to be managed, to be restored if these are degraded ecosystems. So then they have to be restored. They have to be modified if necessary. But we also, as human beings, when we are looking for our well-being and we are trying to reap the biodiversity benefits, then we also have to have our adaptive ability. We have to adapt to natural systems, which we have not done, the price of which has really been very, very high. What are the ecosystem benefits that we get? Very quickly, if we have a look, we have provisioning services from the ecosystem. When you get something from nature, I mean, starting from your fruits and flowers and timber and honey and everything that you get, these are actually natural provisions which we get from the ecosystem. Ecosystem also has a regulating activity. I mean, these are areas where you talk about pollution, for example, checking soil erosion. So soil, water, air, all these things are actually regulated. And that is what is called the ecosystem benefit in the regulating component. And finally, the ecosystems also give benefits in the cultural activities. I mean, it's just our aesthetic, spiritual, emotional, all these benefits which we get. But it's as simple as saying that if we are sitting in the middle of nature, we feel happy. And happiness is something which is central to human existence. We do everything for utility. We do everything for happiness. We do everything for well-being. So this cultural component of ecosystem benefits is as important as the regulating function of ecosystems and the provisioning function of ecosystem. And therefore, sustainable use of nature, sustainable use of ecosystems, protection of ecosystems, and working towards the regeneration of the degraded ecosystems is something which is in the center of NBS. If we have to have these kind of solutions, we have to have sustainable resource management. There is no doubt about that. If we have to talk about restoration, management, and protection of ecosystems, then there are several alternative and not alternative, overlapping also. They all coexist. There are different types of actions which can be taken: ecosystem-based adaptation, ecosystem-based mitigation, eco-disaster risk reduction. These three, I am sure, are self-explanatory, that we have to have adaptation and adaptive activities, actions reoriented and restored based on ecosystems. We definitely need to have mitigation of problems, degradation based on ecosystems. And definitely we have to have activities geared towards policy design towards reduction of disaster risk. We talk a lot about disaster risk these days. Maybe at on some other occasion, we can talk about those. Green infrastructure, I have already mentioned, and natural climate solutions. So we have to have our natural climatic solutions. The solutions that we designed cannot be designed without due consideration to the climate. And we don't need to go once again about the climate emergency and the climate risk. So these are the various components of nature-based solution, which is a huge umbrella under which we have all these things for food security, resource security, water security. Water and food security is something very, very crucial for our existence, for our health, and our socioeconomic development. All these things are very much rooted in nature-based solutions. So the color for our future after COVID, the post-COVID world, has to have the color code green, and we cannot think of anything other than nature-based solutions. Since we started our discussion by saying that cities and urban centers actually were in the center of the problem that we are facing now, let us try to very quickly have a look at the kind of things that we can do in our urban landscapes. How can we bring in a little bit of nature in the cities and our urban centers? These are some of the well-known measures that can be taken, that are being taken in many parts of the world. We can have green roofs, we can have green walls, we can have green barriers. You must be seeing these things a lot I mean, these are very much available both in the literature as well as in photographs. Even on the roadsides, you have these green walls, these green barriers. Say even the pillars of the flyovers which you see when you cross, when you move, you can see that all these things are being turned into green. So these are for several purposes. These are acting as guards against air pollution. These are acting as guards against noise pollution, and definitely for heat dissipation. So these urban greening activities is kind of a non-negotiable action that we have to take up. We can have urban forests, we can have vertical forests. Just one point which I would like to mention here quickly, and this again is not the forum to discuss that point in detail. When we design our green landscape, there's also an important need to design in a correct way which trees to be planted as a guard against which kind of pollution, at what level, at what height. All these are also matters of scientific detail. Guards in general are guards against pollution, but all guards are not equally efficient in our lives also. And similarly, all trees are also not equally efficient guards. So therefore, there has to be a proper, well thought out planning about which trees to plant for which purpose, where in urban centers, in industrial belts, where do we plant which kind of trees? What is the tolerance level that these trees have? So therefore, all trees are not equally good for all purposes. So a lot of scientific research goes in designing urban greens properly. We can also think of urban farming. Sponge cities is a new concept. I think this term is also self-explanatory, that it will act as a sponge. It will soak irrigation and water, and therefore it will lead towards a sustainable city. We should also think of sustainable urban drainage systems, the SUDs. So all these are part of NBS. If we have to bring in nature into urban life, these are must. This is a new concept which has come up, and this has come up very recently, the 20-minute neighborhood concept. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this, which says that everything should be in your neighborhood so that you don't have to travel for more than 20 minutes. This is something very, very important in urban lives, that urban hubs are such that everything can be covered in 20 minutes. So the radius of that circle should not be more than such that which can be covered in 20 minutes. So starting from your school to your hospital to your grocery, everything should be in a 20-minute neighborhood. And this is something which is in practice in many countries, New Zealand, Australia, these are working towards those. This is a very, very viable, sustainable concept for several countries, perhaps not so easy for all countries, but we can definitely work towards that. Smart commuting and public transport. This is also something which has come up. Some countries have, exercised this. I think Israel is one of the leading countries in this context. Smart commuting says, the whole idea was actually to reduce public movement during the pandemic so that people stay at home, and if they have to move out, they travel the least. So if you have a smart design of finding out the shortest route, then that is considered to be smart commuting. That will minimize the use of public transport, which is the shortest route so that I travel the least. And this is not something which should be confined only to the pandemic and the pandemic treatment, but this is something which can really be taken up for our future policy designs. Firstly, use of public transport, and secondly, using public transport in a smart way so that you travel the least. So 20-minute neighborhood and smart commuting can actually go hand in hand, and in both, public transport should be playing the crucial role. And this is a very common feature, a well-known feature of developed societies, where public transport is the backbone of urban movement, unlike in countries like ours. Finally, I would like to talk a little about what we should be doing, because we as citizens, we as members of the civil society, are concerned. We are worried, we are concerned, and therefore we have to introspect. It's not only the state which should be taking all decisions. It is not only science and technology, but it's also society. So these three are actually the three legs of the tripod of well-being and development. So you and I are important as members of the civil society. A very old theory from environmental economics is something that I'm using here, which is known as the IPAT theory. As we understand, and as I said in the beginning, that economic growth and economics is actually the bad guy. Anything going wrong, blame economics. I would like to put a point of caution here. Very often you would find the use of the term the phrase economic development. So blame economic development for everything. You would also perhaps hear this from several experts who say that economic development is not possible in a sustainable manner. Economic development cannot be sustainable. So sustainable development or sustainable economic development is an oxymoron. This is also a school of thought. I would like to mention here that we need to be very careful about the use of the word development here. What we generally mean by economic development when we blame the economic development as the bad guy is actually economic growth, economic prosperity. Economic development is not only bringing in more production, more employment, more income, more output. That is economic growth. Economic development actually is a superset. It goes beyond economic growth, where it brings in social variables, education, health, well-being. All these are part of development. And therefore, when we are trying to find out the sustainable path of economic development, it is not an oxymoron. Because our well-being cannot be, we have understood it very well by paying a very high price, that our well-being cannot be devoid of environmental considerations. So if we are really using the term development in its true spirit, then economic development can be made sustainable, and we have to make it sustainable. The blame that we put on economic activities is actually economic growth. When we talk about economic growth, we are actually talking about more production, more income, more employment, more output, more prosperity, more GDP. I mean, these are words all of you are familiar with. So then that has problems of environmental degradation. And there people, there's a strong school of thought which says that, yes, initially when you start growing, you have to pay a price, and environmental degradation is the initial cost that you bear, the initial price that you pay for economic growth. Accepted. But when we are talking about economic development, we have actually moved ahead of that. What happens in economic growth? The IPAT theory says IPAT means impact, population, affluence, technology. It says that environmental impact is a product of three factors: population, affluence, and technology. So these three factors create the environmental impact. That means if you have large population, there will be an impact. If you are very affluent, that will have an impact. And if you are having technological progress, that will have an impact. The later modification of the IPAT theory became ICAT: impact, consumption, affluence, and technology. Just let us notice the change in only one term, bringing in a host of ideas that we need to have in our mind. From population, we have become consumption. I mean, the word has become consumption. What does this imply? It says that population just in itself may not have a negative impact on the environment just because the population is large. Population is also another bad guy. In all our social discussions, in all our economic discussions, population is a bad guy. Any failure is because of the large population. Now, what we are trying to say here is that it is not only population per se, but population leading to consumption. There are people who are part of nature, who are part of the natural ecosystems. Do they really pollute? Do they really degrade? We need to stop and ask ourselves, or is it our consumption which impacts? Definitely it's our consumption. So the story can therefore be woven by saying that a society where population consumes out of their affluence, and in that affluence, the supply side has been provided by technology. So an technologically advanced society with affluent people consuming large amount of products based on natural resource extraction is the bad guy. Therefore, consumption is something which is in our hands. And the basic principle of economics says that if there is not consumption demand which is large enough, production will definitely come down because production is guided by consumption. Therefore, my dear young friends, I'm talking about you and me, all of us. Consumption is in our hand, and by regulating consumption, we can actually influence the industrial ecology. And therefore, from industry, we can actually move towards a sustainable economy. Consumerism has increased so much in the last 30 years. I'm sorry, I may sound like an old school person, which I am. In the last 30 years, in the global village that we reside in the global world, in the post-globalization period, all of you are post-globalization children, consumerism has increased so much. And therefore, if you just go back to one of the earlier slides, which I showed, the use of primary materials extracted from nature is increasing by leaps and bounds. And that is guided by nothing but the huge consumption demand, the large and rising, ever increasing consumption demand. And that is where I have an appeal to all of you as stakeholders. You and I do make a difference. So we have a role to play. As members of the society, we are generally very naive. Our response is generally one of ignoring it, denying it, until a crisis actually hits. And that is the time which has come. It's not in your textbooks anymore. It is not in the intellectual fashion of discussions and debates. It's right here. So we cannot ignore and deny. The crisis has already hit us. So our behavioral pattern has to change. And you and I can definitely make a difference. We can change our lifestyle. We can definitely reduce our footprint. We can manage our waste by the 5R waste minimization principle. We have to bring in sustainability definitely in the urban centers. And for that, green initiatives for maintenance of protection and maintenance, conservation of ecology and environment is a must. It's non-negotiable. And therefore, it's an appeal from an old teacher to my young friends that you participate in actions to save your planet. And you have to lead humankind to a better world. Because in the end, our wealth depends on nature's health. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that really informative and interesting talk. The idea that whatever we consume, whether by choice or by necessity, it's going to come back to us in different forms of environmental challenges. It's high time that we all acknowledge that. Your talk has it's extremely relevant in today's time in the current crisis, where we can and it can possibly be an important piece of document for policy design post COVID management. And I'm certainly going to share it with some of my friends who are actually working in suggesting policies to the government as in terms of post COVID management, designing policies for post COVID management. So I think so. On a personal note, I might add that I personally benefited partially more than most of the participants here, because for me it was like a consolidated revision of everything that we learned. I learned in environmental economics, which ma'am taught me so well way back in 2010, and it was wonderful to go through all those concepts and have a very wonderful revision. So I would just open the house for any questions that. Any questions or any query, you can type it in the chat box. And meanwhile, I'll just ask one of my own query. And meanwhile, you can just type in your questions there. So, ma'am, this the cost of COVID management, as I could summarize, is not only going to be economic but also going to be environmental. Now, I just had a query in my mind that do we have any management plan included within the policy with the government to during the post-COVID era? Considering that when the people's life are at stake, when the whole economy is at stake, are we even going to think about environmental challenges when we will be managing our post-COVID situations? Yes, ma'am.
So Naveen, are you asking me? You are. Now, there is a difference between what is positive and what is normative, right? Normative is what it should be, and positive what it is. And if I really get into talking about what is happening, what has been happening, and what should have been there, then perhaps we will, tread into a dangerous, debatable terrain. And I'm sure all the participants have something to say there, how we have handled as a state, how we have handled COVID, both for life and livelihood, is something which needs a lot of introspection, a lot of debate and discussion, maybe criticism, and the need for policy planners. We as academics can raise these questions, we can, give pointers, but finally the policy planners have to pay attention to these things, and it's in their hands. And the COVID experience in that sense, the positive COVID experience, positive means has happened, the empirical experience has not really been something very encouraging compared to the normative, what it should have been. So I'm personally, I have a lot of reservation about the way the government is, has handled. Yes, Tanu has something to say. Tanu, why don't you unmute your mic and let us all hear your opinion? The kind of work that you are doing in solid waste management.
Hello. Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are, Tanu. Please ask the question.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am, for your presentation. Ma'am, based on I'm currently working in the solid waste management field, and my job is based in currently in Noida, but I reside in Delhi. So based on my observations, waste segregation at source is not being implemented as it should be. So on my observations, Noida is still proactive than Delhi in this context. So I want to know, what are your views on implementation of these waste segregation, considering the new category of COVID-19 waste, which can, contaminate the normal mixed waste? Because CBCB also gave this rule that this isolated homes should give their waste in a yellow double-layered bag, but then that is also not properly happening. So your views on it, ma'am?
Well, my views, it's a difficult proposition, really. And as I was telling Naveen in the previous context also, that what you and I can do. So it's state and society, both are stakeholders. We all have to work together as stakeholders. And that is what I meant when I said sustainability is a systems problem. It's a systems issue where we all are important. So I think there has been a limitation or a shortcoming on the part of the state, for sure. For example, there are many occasions, these are personal experiences from many of us, I'm sure, that we segregate. But finally, when it goes to the dump, the municipality does not take it forward. So that is a problem on the part of the state. But at the same time, this is also true that we as citizens are also not doing our bit. Yes. So the situation that we are in right now is it's a negative situation from both the state side and our side. So the whole idea of talking about these things is to generate some kind of an awareness, consciousness among ourselves, so that each one of us who is here takes it to another 50, another 100, and it spreads, and we develop a design. And also by increasing this, we can perhaps reach the policy planners. And therefore, we need to have action. What I'm doing here is just talking about it, and I know talking is not a solution, but talking perhaps be a condition for generating awareness so that each one of us do our bit. And if all of us do our bit, then perhaps we can bring in changes in the systems. So I'm just optimistic about it. So my view is one of optimism. And I mean, all that I can do is appeal to everyone to do, each one of us doing our own bit. And that is also the basic principle in economic theory. Every micro can therefore be added to the aggregate.
Okay.
The technical details, the technological details, the policy constraints, these are better understood by those who deal with technology, those who deal with policy, and those who deal with policy implementation. Policy implementation is a state responsibility. So all components have to work together. Otherwise, I don't see any solution. At times, it's very frustrating. In fact, the second part of our presentation today, our lecture today, will be by Dr. Naveen Kumar Tiwari, where he will be showcasing the kind of efforts that we have tried to make within our very limited scope. As small units, we can do our bit, but then finally it has to be translated to a bigger macro.
Okay.
If there is no other question, then I would take the privilege of inviting Dr. Naveen Kumar Tiwari, who will be presenting a case study, which is very close to our heart and very close to our experience. Dr. Naveen Kumar Tiwari, by training.
There is one more question.
There is? Okay.
There is.
There is. Nandini. See, this, what Nandini Vats is asking about, the various kinds of NBS solutions that I mentioned, but how do we implement this? Where do we lack in public policy? Where is enforcement? What kind of acts? This is exactly what what Tanu was also raising, that these are actually in this domain of the state. Public policy is not what you and I can design, but we can definitely create an environment, a social environment of awareness, and also taking it towards the public policy planners, where they are forced to, they are bound to take necessary actions, pass the necessary acts, and implement those. Implementation, there are many things on paper. Like when we were working on solid waste management, we have seen our solid waste management rules are pretty old. Just after independence, we designed all these. All these are there on paper. But how do we implement? I mean, if I start talking about these things, this will actually take me to another area of discussion in economics, which talks about institutional economics. What are the institutions which we require? Just having a law is not enough. You have to have an efficient judicial institution. You have to have an efficient legal institution. And world history shows that economies which have done well have very strong and efficient institutions. So we can do our bit, but finally we have to have an institutional structure where we are also sincere in maintaining those. But as people behave, this is our behavioral pattern, that unless there is some kind of an enforcement and a threat of enforcement, penalty, eviction, punishment, then we also behave in a very lackadaisical way. This is human behavior. And the new behavioral economics actually is an area where these human behavior are put into theory. And institutions are therefore very, very important. And institutions is something which you and I cannot design. We can have the social institutions, but not the other market, judicial, legal, all these institutions. So with strong institutions only, you can have a more efficient and more impactful implementation of policies, whatever you design. Yes, Tanu, sanitary waste is something that I have struggled a lot when we started our waste management project. So sanitary waste is one big area. I have asked several people who are directly involved, I mean organizations which are directly involved with waste management, organizations as well known as Chintan. I have raised this question with people from the Ministry of MOEFCC, Environment, Forestry and Climate Change. they don't have an answer. They do not have an answer, and therefore I am also not having any answer, and I'm feeling equally helpless as you are. And for us women, it's so important, so crucial. But I have heard about some work taking place, happening. There was it was actually a PhD project which has now moved to a startup. Banana fiber being used for sanitary napkins. Now, the problem with this kind of innovative solutions is the cost. Unless these things are cost effective, unless these things are cheap, these things do not capture the market. And that is where the government has to intervene. Banana fiber is a pure natural solution. But per piece sanitary napkin was so much more expensive compared to the regular ones which are in the market, then nobody will switch the behavior pattern. So we need state intervention there. Meanwhile, we keep on doing our bit, and we can hope for a better future. And it's high time that we realize this. COVID that way is a gateway for green solutions. We have to pick it up, be it you, be it me, be it the state. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I think there is
So
one
now
more.
over to, yes.
There is one more query from Mrinalini, if you would wish to take, if you have time to take Mrinalini.
Mrinalini.
It's just above Tanu's last question. I can read it out to you. Thank you for this very
Well,
informative
I
session.
got development and growth, the difference between development and growth in terms of sustainable economy. Mrinalini, we can have a longer discussion because this will actually take us into a much deeper and prolonged discussion. It's almost 4 o'clock. I can share my email address and we can have a discussion on this because it will take us to basic ideas of growth, development, sustainability, and sustainable economy. I'm just typing my email address here and we can continue later. I invite Naveen now for the second part of the presentation.